Hallo, dit is Vrydag 1 September. Ons hoop jy het 'n heerlike lentedag gehad. Baie welkom by Fokus. Ek is Lenet Francis Peuren. Bietjie later in die program vertel ons meer oor Kimberley se planne om misdaad in die sakekern te bekamp. Die Zimbabwese opposisie, die CCC van Nelson Chamisa, het reeds aangedui dat hulle die uitslag van verlede week se verkiesing in die buurland gaan betwis. Dit volg nadat president Emmerson Mnangagwa 52,6% van die stemme op hom verenig het en Chamisa 44%. Chamisa beweer daar was grootskaalse bedrog met die verkiesing. Talle waarnemers, soos die van die Suid-Afrikaanse Ontwikkelingsgemeenskap, het die verkiesing gekritiseer. Maar die Zimbabwese verkiesingskommissie het die verkiesing as vry en regverdig verklaar. Om die gebeure te bespreek is ons nou telefonies in verbinding met veteraanjoernalis Peta Thornycroft, wat reeds dekades lang verslag doen oor Suid-Afrika en veral Zimbabwe. Sy het ook pas teruggekeer van Zimbabwe, waar sy die verkiesing vir 'n Britse koerant gedek het. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Peter, maybe explain to our viewers the impact and the influence the divide between urban and rural areas have on voting patterns in Zimbabwe.
Okay, so about 70% of the population of Zimbabwe is rural, which is quite a high percentage, for example, compared to South Africa. So that means that those rural people who are mostly earning their own living via some kind of farming are not able to, interact with what's going on in the cities, the developments that may be taking place, any media that there may be, including often, unless they've got solar panels, and more do have solar panels, even to watch television or radio or have access to information. Not that the access to information via TV and radio is much use, as that's totally controlled by the government. So the rural people will obviously be mostly speaking indigenous languages. They will have less access to the main language in Zimbabwe, the common language in Zimbabwe, which is English. And they have tended to, right from way back when, including the Bush War that brought Zimbabwe to independence in 1980, supported traditionally either the ruling party in three-quarters of the country, that's ZANU-PF, or in the southern part of the country during the war, the old ZAPU. That has changed a lot because ZAPU hardly functions anymore. But they will, broadly speaking, through tradition and the war and habit and language, mostly support the ruling party, not least that it's quite hard for the urbanites to get out to the rural areas to campaign. So before you even start elections in Zimbabwe, one needs to have that in one's head, that the urban areas traditionally support the opposition and the rural areas traditionally support the ruling party. But of course, there are always exceptions and it depends on the campaigning.
Let's quickly talk about whether this election, in your opinion, was free and fair. Given the fact that Chamisa and CCC is planning to go to court to contest this election?
I don't know that they're going to go to court to contest it, but I haven't seen a free and fair election in Zimbabwe for at least the last 23 years. You cannot have a free and fair election in Zimbabwe when the state media, the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation, the equivalent of the SABC, is controlled by the ruling party. They never seem to have understood this. They just don't understand it. They always say, well, there are lots of other little radio stations. All of those other little radio stations, and I listen to them, hardly do news. They do talk shows and music, especially over the election time, and those are all also controlled by people who are loyal to, who would be too scared to, in fact, defy ZANU-PF. So there's no access to privately owned media via the broadcast system in Zimbabwe. There are a few privately owned newspapers in Harare, which at the moment are suffering terribly because they're so broke. So those you can get online to read them if you've got the money and you've got a laptop. And if you're in the rural areas, you're unlikely to have more than a phone. You can do it by phone, and you may have solar power to have a look, but you've got to pay for it if you're going online. So there's very little access to information. So Zimbabwe operates on social media. The social media is absolutely massive. And so I often wonder how accurate social media is, because one hears all sorts of extraordinary things. So I think, and the newspapers, there's a main newspaper in Harare called the Herald newspaper, which just as it was under Rhodesia, in Zimbabwe it is controlled by the ruling party, although the people of Zimbabwe have 50% shares in that newspaper group. But it is a ZANU-PF newspaper. So free and fair, just at the level of media, you cannot say free and fair.
So should I assume that you then say that the results that we've seen is not really a true reflection of what's been happening on the ground?
I would love to know what would happen if there was free broadcast media in Zimbabwe that people in rural areas could tune into and have talk shows as we do on SABC or all the privately owned radio stations in Johannesburg and around South Africa. I wonder what would happen if people had easy access to that kind of media. We don't know, because we've never known. It's never ever happened. At no time in Zimbabwe's history has that happened, either before independence in 1980 or after it. So we just don't know. However, take away the media side of it, and even then it's hard to say free and fair, because the Zimbabwe Election Commission, which runs the elections and has done so fully since 2008, is appointed by the government. And the government is ZANU-PF. There's no contestation for who will be a commissioner at the Zimbabwe Election Commission or who will be the chair of the Zimbabwe Election Commission. And in these elections, these recent elections in particular, one just could get no one to answer their phones. Even if you went to the building to try and speak to the commissioner or the chair of the Zimbabwe Election Commission, you couldn't get to speak to them. So they were entirely invisible and inaccessible to the media, let alone to political parties. So Zimbabwe needs to totally transform its Zimbabwe Election Commission, whether or not they are independent. And sometimes in 2018, they were reasonably efficient. We need to remember that in 2018, after the coup d'etat of the previous years, which ousted Robert Mugabe, for the first time since independence, a new voters' roll was formed. And that new voters' roll was, according to election experts at the time, quite efficiently done. And most people who wanted to join did join, and the level of identification of voters was quite efficient. In fact, very efficient. So you do have a voters' roll. People can get registered. At that point, from that exercise, the ZEC was reasonably efficient. But this year, their biggest failure was that in excess of 400 polling stations, and there are 12,300 polling stations, so about 400 polling stations received their ballot papers with between an hour and 12 hours later than voting. Voting was supposed to start on the 23rd of August at 7 a.m. in the morning. Some of the 400 only got their ballot papers at 7 o'clock that night. So they had to then extend, there had to be a proclamation to allow them to continue to vote for 12 hours. But imagine you're in a semi-rural area and you're feeling a bit twitchy. You don't want to go suddenly walking around at 3 o'clock in the morning to go and vote.
Peta, I'm going to quickly interrupt you. We'll continue our discussion after the break. There are some more questions, thorny issues that I want to cover with you. Net hierna sit ons die gesprek voort. As nog baie vrae oor Zimbabwe se pad vorentoe. Bly by ons. Die omstredenheid wat betref die uitslag van die Zimbabwese verkiesing is nog lank nie verby nie. Die CCC opposisieparty het tot Maandag tyd om die aangeleentheid in die hof te betwis. Ons gesels nou verder met veteraanjoernalis Peta Thornycroft. You said before the break that there's still uncertainty whether Chamisa will actually go to court on Monday. But what and how would you describe the presidency of Mnangagwa prior to this election, Peta?
Well, he came to power, as you know, from a coup d'etat, and to begin with, there was a terrible tragedy, actually, before the election results were announced in 2018 when 6 people were killed by the army in the streets of Harare during multi-party violence. So he had a very, very difficult start. And secondly, he was obviously very surprised at how well Chamisa did against him, because Chamisa for the first time went into the rural areas, and we must remember that the CCC, when he fought the elections in 2018, it was called the NDC Alliance. The NDC is the original opposition party from 1999, but it split many times. You know, the opposition has been very split, and yet you've had the ZANU-PF party there, right from independence, in 1980, able to consolidate itself. So how did he do? To begin with, he was quite talkative. He wanted Chamisa to come in and help him in some way with the government. Chamisa turned him down. One of the things he did was he started to repair infrastructure, like the road from Bike Bridge to Harare is nearly complete now. It's a big new highway. He needed to do that. He's built a huge dam. He started to fix the road from Bulawayo to Victoria Falls. And one of the things he did was he assisted many farmers to make sure that Zimbabwe is now self-sufficient in maize for the first time since the land invasions, which began in 2000. So Zimbabwe can feed itself again. He did then do some, really appalling things, like there's an act called, that we know is the Patriot Act, which means that if you say things critical of ZANU-PF and somebody decides to sue you, the government decides to sue you, you would be nervous in certain circumstances to criticize the government. There have been other acts in the court. People say that what has actually happened is that the standard of education, which was already low before he came into power, has not improved under his administration. And the healthcare system, the hospitals are there, but they've got no drugs in it. Yes. Health services for the everyday person are extremely difficult. However, Zimbabwe did try and do very well under COVID. During the pandemic, they did try and do it, but they couldn't afford the same kind of vaccinations we had in South Africa. They got free vaccinations from the Chinese. So it's a very mixed record of what Mnangagwa did. I think the improvements have definitely been in agriculture, and the failures have been in human rights, really,
Yes.
People are arrested, and then it takes ages for them to get bail. There's one opposition guy who's been trying to get bail for about 14 months. And also during the elections, however, they arrested 38 people who were connected to the elections from NGOs, and they were just arrested one night and held and laid on their stomachs for 3 hours. They did get bail the next day of $200. And the other thing that Mnangagwa did ahead of the elections was he changed how much it costs to stand for elections. So to stand in the presidential election, you have to find $20,000. Well, in rands, that's unconscionable.
Yes.
And even those standing for parliament have to find $1,000. That's 18,000 rand. And that was terribly unfair in these elections.
Particularly for the independent candidates. We have under a minute. I do want to ask you, because I've seen some concerns raised about it. Do you foresee that there's possibly going to be an influx of illegal immigrants from Zimbabwe to South Africa? You have under a minute, Peter.
I think there's so many here anyway, and the ones who are here do play a very good job in supporting their relatives in Zimbabwe. I didn't hear that at all. What I do hear is that nursing sisters trained in Zimbabwe, even though their standards might not be terrific, they're trying to go to the UK. They're trying to go to the UK if they possibly can. I don't think so. I think there's so many here already. But you never know. I mean, it all depends on whether there's a good agricultural season. So if it's a good agricultural season, I don't think that you'll see a lot of them. If they're suddenly terribly short of food, etc., maybe they will come.
Peter, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Really appreciate your insights. Ons hou die gebeure in Zimbabwe dop en as enigiets verander, dan sal ons jou inlig. Net hierna praat ons oor watter planne in Kimberley gemaak word om die sakekern te beveilig. Nou terug. Welkom terug by Fokus. Besighede en belanghebbendes in Kimberley sit nou koppe bymekaar om die sakekern van die stad wat al gevaarliker geraak het te beveilig. Die Safe City projek wat landwyd van stapel gestuur is, het in Kimberley tot stilstand gekom. Regisseur Keith Seister het gaan hoor wat nou gedoen word om die projek weer van die grond af te kry.
Agter my is 'n gedeelte van die middestad van Kimberley wat oor jare al meer en meer onveiliger vir inwoners geword het om in te beweeg. Nou het besighede bymekaar gekom om planne te maak om die middestad weer vir inwoners te beveilig.
We've got a project named the Safer Cities that we have been working with SABC and our local municipality. This has been running now for almost 3.5 years. We as business are part of this project. We have been running with the project. It is a project where there's 20 provinces that are part of it, and we are one of them. We had a meeting on 2 days ago with this project. It came out very clearly, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it came out very clearly from SABC National that we are 3 years down the line and we have nothing done. So from that perspective, we as business have decided, you know what, we can't carry on like this. We cannot. For our residents of the city, for us to stay in Kimberley, we stay here for a reason, not because we have to, because we love the city. Apart from it being basically the capital of the Northern Cape, we love Kimberley. So unfortunately, it's come to this that we've realized government departments, local municipalities are not interested in business. They're not interested in the residents of our province. So we have formed a project with security companies, with our member companies, and we are going to be involved ourselves to look after our city, our neighborhoods, and wherever we can, because we have to protect the residents and the businesses of Kimberley.
Volgens Sharon Stein is die Kimberley sakekern dalk nou een van die mees agtergeblewe in die land.
Kimberley used to have one of the best CBDs in the country. I think we can declare ourselves almost one of the worst CBDs in the country at the moment. I don't know if we can see behind us, around us, the state of our CBD is absolutely shocking. Apart from cleanliness, it's just non-existent at the moment. It's overtaken by shops that are not supposed to be in the CBD, businesses that are closed. There's just nothing has been done to the CBD itself. And it's a shocker.
Meeste besighede wat aanvanklik in die middestad gevestig was, beweeg nou na winkelsentrums of gebiede buite die middestad.
It's not safe at all. We also need to say that this CBD, and I think that is why most of businesses are leaving our CBD. Kimberley CBD, or business is moving out of town. Nobody wants to come here. It's not safe. You cannot. A woman alone, tourists. As a matter of fact, anybody, if you drive in your car in the CBD, the chances are, I think we're on, at the moment, our 80% rate of safety for the CBD, and that is what we are sitting at. You cannot, no tourists can walk around here. And I mean, we've got tourism routes for the historical side of the city, and nobody wants to even bring tourists through here.
Volgens Sharon is dit nou uiters gevaarlik vir besighede wat steeds aanbly om saans laat toe te maak.
Businesses that operate and they close sometimes late at night, you can't. You've actually got to get a security guard or SABC, if you can get hold of them, to actually be with you to lock up your shops. So from a business perspective, very, very bad at this particular moment. Yes.
Die vraag is egter nou, waar gaan die geld om die beveiligingsprojek aan die gang te hou vandaan kom?
Unfortunately, it's going to have to come out of the pockets of business. It's going to have to come out of the pockets of the residents. Yes, we're also going to have a lot of people that are going to moan and say, why should they do it? Then I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to say it. We had, from a government department, money was given to put up cameras in the CBD. That money was taken away, and when we as business actually asked why was it taken away, the question raised, or the answer given to us was, no, it's been given to a different project. Now, my question from business is, what is a better project than the safer cities or the safeness of the people, the residents of Kimberley?
Ons het ook by inwoners gaan hoor of hulle voel dat die middestad van Kimberley steeds veilig is.
Ek dink is die veilig, want as hulle miskien die street kids storm te so sê, kan nie die dorp daar, dat gaan bietjie veilig is. Want ons is bang om te rond te loop in die nag en tussen tee ook, want hulle vat ons so goed. Ja, ek dink is veilig, as hulle net die manne kan verminder. Die polisie moet patrol, cameras, want die manne stel die cables, so, dat gaan nou wees word, dat die polisie net bietjie visible word.
Maar ons hoop net die council of die polisie moet weer alles op camera terugbring daarso van, dan kan hy enige ding sien wat gaan hier aan.
En wanneer is dit nie veilig nie?
Maar weekends en die dag, maar maybe in die aanden kan ons nog iets sê van, meeste van tyd is ook nie hier in die aanden nie. Maar hierdie dag nie, as het nogal die probleme nie.
Al hierdie kant van die area is baie onveilig, by mense word geroof en so aan, ja, soos hierdie gebou hier so Pick n Save was hier 'n rooftog en so aan. So dit is baie onveilig eintlik die kant. So jy moet meer versigtig is om hier loop en so ja.
Die Suid-Afrika munisipaliteit sê die komitee verantwoordelik vir die projek het ontbind en daar word nou weer pogings aangewend om die komitee te herroep.
Wel, dis die einde van vanaand se uitsending. Onthou, al ons Fokus uitsendings is steeds op YouTube beskikbaar. Soek net op YouTube onder Fokus, SABC en die datum van die uitsending. Ons plaas ook die YouTube skakel op die Fokus Facebookblad. Jy kan ons daar kry. Volgende week Vrydag aand om 8:30 is ons terug op ons pos. Ons groet eers vir vanaand. Geniet jou naweek, bly veilig. Dankie vir die saamkyk. Totsiens.